Tonight's the 200th edition of the South Bank Show, and to mark the occasion we have a special programme for this Good Friday. The subject is the great French composer Olivier Messiaen, who's played a major role in the evolution of 20th century music. Many musicians the world over consider him quite simply the greatest composer alive today. He draws on a wide variety of sources and has created from them music of a unique richness and depth of sound. Alan Benson's film was shot in Paris with Messiaen and in the countryside that has inspired him most, his home province of the French Alps. Messiaen's chief personal source of creativity is his profound belief in God. We've called our film The Music of Faith.
Il y avait un très vieux piano, un piano droit cassé horrible dans la maison, et j'allais au piano et j'ai appris à jouer du piano tout seul.
There was an ancient piano in the house, a broken, dreadful old upright, which I taught myself to play. And I began to compose, completely untutored.
Chaque fois qu'il y avait une fête, par exemple la fête de Noël ou la fête de...
When it came to Christmas time or my birthday, I didn't ask for toys as presents. I asked for musical scores. I asked for Orfeo by Gluck, and someone got it for me. And one day I was sitting on a bench in the park in Grenoble, looking at the great aria in F major in the first act, the most beautiful thing Gluck ever wrote. And I noticed an extraordinary thing. I was reading, sitting there, and I could hear what I was reading in my head. So, I was a musician. I say what I can say, with only the feeble song of man in response to nature. Religion is there all the time. God is in the trees, in the mountains, in the sky. He is everywhere. Christ was radiant at the moment of the Transfiguration. He was radiant at the moment of the resurrection. And we too shall be radiant when we rise again. It was while I was in the mountains that I had the idea for this work. Looking at the glaciers of the Meije, I was suddenly aware of the difference between the dazzling whiteness of the snow and the even more dazzling splendor of the sun. That's how I understood the difference between our tiny man-made lights and the great light of the resurrection and the transfiguration.
Olivier Messiaen is France's greatest living composer. He's been writing music for organ, orchestra, piano and voice for more than half a century. Over that period, music has changed more quickly and more fundamentally than at any other time, and Messiaen himself has been a key figure in that change, both as composer and as teacher. His works are many and varied, but the beliefs underlying them have remained constant. He's an ardent Christian, and his deep faith in God has informed all of his compositions. The other fundamental element in Messiaen's life and work is his love of nature. He regards all nature as God's masterpiece, but he's particularly inspired by birdsong, which is used in a completely new way. The compositions based on it are some of his most original and attractive music.
Ça, c'est une chose extraordinaire.
That was the extraordinary thing. My family was not religious. I was not brought up in the Christian faith. I was born with faith.
Je suis né avec la foi. Bon, eh bien, je suis né et...
I was born and spent my early childhood in Grenoble during the First World War.
La Première Guerre mondiale, j'étais un enfant très rêveur.
I was a dreamy child. I read, I thought, I made theatre scenery. I acted all Shakespeare's plays for an audience of one, my little brother.
Pour un unique spectateur qui était mon petit frère, je n'ai eu personne, j'étais tout seul.
I had no friends. I was on my own, and I loved music on my own. There was one little boy called Jean Licou who I liked very much, but he died when he was 7. So I was alone.
Alors c'est tout, je n'ai pas eu d'amis et j'ai été élevé surtout par ma mère puisqu'il n'y avait pas d'hommes.
I was brought up almost entirely by my mother, since there weren't any men around at that time. All the men were away at war, at the front. I grew up in an atmosphere of poetry. I read Shakespeare. I even read my mother's poems. I didn't understand them or the Shakespeare. I was too young. But all the same, it was an enchanted world. And in the Shakespeare, what I understood, what I loved, were the fairies, the goblins, the ghosts, all the apparitions, the supernatural things. But I don't know why I was drawn to music. It was an innate gift. As I say, I saw a piano, I began to play, and instinctively I made good harmonies, and instinctively I composed. I even wrote canons, which was rather odd. I didn't know Bach's music. I didn't know anything. From 1914 to 1918, I went to school like all little boys. I played pieces I bought for myself. In Grenoble, there was a big music shop called Désert. I used to go inside and look at the scores. One I bought that I liked very much was Grieg's Peer Gynt. There are beautiful Norwegian melodic lines with a taste of folk song. They're very pretty, and they influenced me a lot. They gave me a love of melody. My mother was a great poet, and I admired her deeply. She died very young, when I was 18. That was a catastrophe for me. But she left us a masterpiece called The Flowering Soul, which she wrote when she was expecting me, before I was born. And the marvelous thing is that this book is dedicated to a boy, which she certainly couldn't have known. And what's more, it's dedicated to a musician. There's this extraordinary line: I feel a distant, unknown music. When I was born, it was a terrible wrench for her. I'm not talking about the pain of labor. I'm talking about the spiritual parting. She wrote this line: He is born, I have lost my little darling. It's quite incredible. I don't think most mothers feel like this. In astonishing poetry, with wonderfully precise imagery, she described the way the child is enfolded by the mother. I'll read you just 4 lines.
Je suis autour de toi comme l'amande verte.
I am around you like the green almond, which closes its case around the milky kernel, like the soft husk with its cottony folds protecting the young, silky grain. I read that poem when I was 8 years old. Of course, I didn't understand it. I did not realize it was about a mother expecting a child. I knew nothing. All the same, it certainly influenced me, not only my destiny, but also my way of thinking. It gave me a sense of wonder. My mother loved fairy tales. She must have read them when she was expecting me. And the fact that she read them made me love them too. I read French fairy tales, Perrault stories, which are very famous in France. And I read Madame d'Aulnoy's stories. I think she is the genius of fairy tale writers. From the first, she captured my imagination. In my religion, we believe the invisible is real. This is not a fairy tale. This is real. We believe in the resurrection of the dead and in the body glorified. So the bodies raised from the dead have exactly the same qualities as the characters in a fairy tale. The bodies glorified are ethereal. That means they have no need to eat or reproduce or to be born. And the most beautiful quality of all is that they are agile. They can fly to the stars easily, unaided, in an instant, with the speed of light. That is known as the gift of agility. As a matter of fact, I've written a piece about it to try to capture the beauty of the thing.
Messiaen's faith in God came to him early, but there were other musical influences at work too.
I had a music teacher, a very poor man who made his living by giving lessons, though he never let me pay him. And when I left him, he gave me a score of Debussy's Pelléas and Mélisande. Well, that was a great revelation. That was love at first sight. I played it on the piano very badly, but I did play it, and as a matter of fact, I cried. Debussy's music is like water. Water is still, unmoving. But immediately you throw a pebble in, there's a shock wave around the pebble, and the water is set in motion. And Debussy's music is like that. There are stops, then all of a sudden it moves. And it was those stops that seized my imagination.
Someone who knows Messiaen's work well is the young English composer George Benjamin, who was a student of his.
Messiaen has loved Debussy's music passionately throughout his life. The very first day I arrived at the Conservatoire, he brought the score and the recording of L'Après-midi d'un Faune and analysed it for us. And if I just play the very opening, I can explain perhaps one or two things that have struck Messiaen from a very early age. The suppleness of the opening melody, the way it floats and the way it moves so lyrically and outside a steady beat, was already very striking to him. And this extraordinary silence, the music just stops. And it's complete silence for a whole bar. And then the opposition of these two chords again, that cold one against that warm sounds of the strings and the horns, which is repeated. And just floats there, enjoying the sound. That was very important for Messiaen. There are several moments in Messiaen's music that do sound like Debussy, I suppose, but he doesn't have the impressionism, the suppleness, the mysteriousness that Debussy has. His music is direct and hard-edged, practically always. But if I play an example from Pelléas and Mélisande, it will sound very much like an early Messiaen example that I'll play afterwards, especially the end of this Debussy example. Listen. Compare that with a song that Messiaen wrote in his early 30s, I think. It's almost the same chords. Almost the same chords. Yet one is obviously Debussy and the other is obviously Messiaen.
Messiaen's musical education continued in Paris, where he studied at the Conservatoire from 1919 to 1930. He regards the training he got there as crucial to his achievement as a composer.
I think it's absolutely vital to master one's calling. There's no other way. You can't be a writer if you don't know the language of the country where you live. You can't be a painter if you don't know how to draw, or if you don't know about colors. And in the same way, you can't be a musician if you can't hear inwardly, if you haven't done harmony, and if you don't know how to orchestrate, it can't be done.
He went to the Conservatoire when he was only 11 years old, and that's very young. He gave up school to go and study there. I believe that he knew quite a lot of music before he went. Berlioz he knew particularly well, Mozart, Ravel, Debussy he knew. And he went there to learn his métier. And in fact, he gave up composing, I believe, for about 8 years, or gave up his own individual composing so he could learn his craftsmanship. And he studied with some very august teachers, the most celebrated one, perhaps Ducasse, who wrote The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
My teacher, Ducasse, taught me structure. That is, how to write complete, properly formed works. But even more important, he taught me how to orchestrate, something I knew nothing about. It was while I was in Ducasse's class that I wrote my first worthwhile composition, the 8 Preludes for Piano.
One of the preludes is played here by Messiaen's wife, the distinguished pianist Yvonne Loriot.
J'ai toujours pensé que je serais un compositeur, oui.
I always knew I was going to be a composer, but to become one I had to resist my teachers. When I was in the piano class, they said I should be a pianist. In the organ class, they said I should be an organist. But I always said, no, I am studying this instrument because one needs to know how to play. But I am not a performer, I'm a composer. In the organ class, I studied improvisation. I didn't know anything about it beforehand. But sometimes I sat down at the piano and invented things. That came easily to me. My teacher, Marcel Dupré, encouraged me a lot, and I became a very good improviser.
Messiaen gives Dupré much of the credit for his lifelong interest in the organ, both as composer and performer. He became organist here at Sainte Trinité in Paris when he was 22, and has played and worshipped here ever since. His first great composition for the organ, The Ascension, written in 1934, was an adaptation of an earlier orchestral piece. The two versions give an idea of how his organ writing and his orchestral writing have fed each other over the years. When Messiaen first saw Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, it made him understand music in a completely new way.
The first time I came to Sainte-Chapelle, I was only a little boy. I must have been about 11 years old. But I was overwhelmed by the colors. I think it was at that moment that I understood that music is colored. When you look at the stained glass window, you don't see all the figures straight away. You just have a sensation of color. You are dazzled, and you have to close your eyes. These little figures show the lives of the saints, of the Virgin Mary, Christ, and the Old Testament prophets. They show the life of Christ particularly well, and also the apocalypse and the end of time. Together they are a sort of pictorial catechism. To my mind, the Sainte-Chapelle is probably the summit of religious art. But the wonderful thing is that these figures are red, green, yellow, blue, all sorts of colors. And these colors are so marvelously beautiful because they are the natural colors made with the powder of natural precious stones. When I hear a chord, a complex of sounds, I see the corresponding colors, not with my eyes, but inside my head.
Je vais vous jouer maintenant en accords parallèles et ça va donner.
Now I shall play you some parallel chords, and this will add a violet blue with little grey plumes and a bit of cobalt blue, a little Prussian blue, some purplish glints, gold, ruby red, and some mauve, black and white stars.
Voilà.
He has a list of chords at home in which he will describe each chord individually by colour, its transposition, its sound, its register. And those are for him a way of composing, a way of starting a piece perhaps. If he wants to start a piece with a shock, he'll start a piece with a red chord and then place a green chord next to it. And that will give a complementary colour in his own mind's eye, which will give a shock to us listeners. Now, we won't perhaps see red and orange or red and green, I don't know. But we will hear a difference in timbre, a difference in sound. I mean, I could quickly play you one of his modes. And another one of his modes. And the sound, I think, is very, very different. The first is quite spicy, the second one is softer. It's clearer. And this one is richer and warmer. Now, the first one, I believe, is violet in some way, and the second one has got red in it, but I'm not sure. And we are allowed, I think, to react personally to these things.
Et un ton plus haut maintenant, ça change encore la couleur.
And another tone higher now, this changes the color again. It's a clear grass green, with little splashes of blue, silver, orange and red.
Messiaen used his coloured chords to great effect in the song cycle he wrote in 1936 and dedicated to his first wife, the violinist Claire Delbault, who later died. In this song, Your Voice, the image of a sunlit afternoon illustrates the sacrament of marriage.
J'ai vu l'alouette monter.
I have seen the lark rise, her voice building a limpid landscape in the light air. Soar away, young lark. Your eggs are laid in the corn, and the dewdrops tremble on the golden grass. My mother's poems made me aware of many things around me, which otherwise I perhaps wouldn't have seen. Over the years, I've notated the songs of thousands of larks. That's one of my specialities. The song of the birds is a great passion of mine. Since I was 18 years old, I've notated bird song everywhere.
Today, Messiaen still collects bird song with enthusiasm and commitment. He's perfected his own system of notating their song, which is a vital element in many of his greatest and most original works. The Montmorency Forest, near Paris, is one of his favourite places, where he explained his love of bird song and how he uses it.
Les oiseaux sont vraiment musiciens et évidemment les oiseaux...
Birds are true musicians. In the beginning, they clearly did what we do now. They listened, and they heard the sound of water drops and the sound of the wind, and they tried to imitate them. And that is how they began to sing. Birds sing very fast, very high, and in no definite pitch. What I write can be played by musical instruments, so it is pitched. It is not so high, and is not quite so fast. I begin by choosing what I want to do, say a warbler. I've notated hundreds of warblers over the years. Then I select what is best from these warblers' songs, and I make a single ideal warbler, the most beautiful one imaginable, which is a composite of all the warblers I ever heard. I don't have time to think when I notate. I just write. The birds come and go very fast. So I listen to the bird nearest me, the one I can hear best, and I notate its song. I do two notations. I do one myself, like musical dictation, and my wife does a tape recording. When I get home, I do a second notation from the recording. That notation is usually more accurate, but it is less artistic. Because out in the open, I heard many variations which are not on the recording.
Sachez bien que les oiseaux ont tout trouvé.
It's important to realize that the birds discovered everything. I have been trying to equal the freedom of their improvisation for almost 60 years.
Birdsong provides Messiaen with practically everything he needs for his music. It gives him supple rhythms, bouncy rhythms that he loves. It gives him a wide variety of sounds, registers. Birds just don't sing tweet, tweet, tweet. They go from all over the register of audible sound, different speeds, different timbre. They give him his counterpoints. They give him his structure. In fact, by the sound of birds waking up at dawn, they give him practically everything. He's not, by any means, the first composer to notate birdsong. But in fact, he once said in the class that I may be forgotten as a composer one day, but perhaps I'll be remembered as the first person to systematically notate birdsong. I'll give you a couple of examples of other people's birdsong. Here's a famous one from the Pastoral Symphony, the first nightingale I'm going to play. And the second one comes 120 years later from L'Enfant les Sortilèges by Ravel. This is again as a nightingale, and it's much more developed. The rhythm is much more supple, the details are much more exact. I'm sure Ravel listened into a forest, actually, to get this. That's very messianic, that. Now, if I play you a Messiaen nightingale, it's different. First he adds the chords. It's even more supple rhythmically, but it does sound a little bit like the Ravel in places.
It is the actual process of transformation that I enjoy most. Monet, when he painted water lilies in the water, was not interested in putting an actual water lily on the picture. He wanted to represent one variation of the light on the water lilies. In the same way, I represent the countryside in all its variety along with the bird. I don't just take the bird on its own when I notate it. I also depict its surroundings, the colours of the bird's plumage and the colours of the countryside too. Usually the countryside is not in the same pitch as the birds, because the bird is something living, whereas the countryside is something still. There's a difference in tone colour. To capture the timbre of the birdsong, I invent a chord for each note. If I'm writing for the piano, the chords alone do this job. But if I'm writing for an orchestra, instruments can be added. Clearly, some instruments are closer to birdsong than others. Flutes and piccolos obviously sound very like birds. There is such a thing as bird counterpoint, too. I notate birds one by one. When I get home, I group together the birds which sing in the same habitat, but which I am not able to notate together. I may even notate them on different days. So it is realistic, but it is not real. I have falsified in only one of my works. In Exotic Birds, I put together birds from Malaysia, China, and North and South America, which have obviously never sung together since they are not in the same country. So that is a deliberately artificial thing, which I did purely for artistic enjoyment. Actually, all the instruments which can be played quickly are close to birdsong. Birdsong is a vital musical source for me. I could almost say it's part of my orchestra, like the flute, the clarinet, the bassoon or the horn. I think it is sad that most people who go to concerts are town dwellers, who unfortunately get up at 9 and go to bed at midnight. Birds, as you know, sing mainly at sunrise and sunset. So the people who live in the towns have never heard them. They see pigeons in the street. At least that's how it is in Paris. There are pigeons in the street, and that is all. In England, it is a bit better. Many houses have gardens with robins in them. But generally speaking, most town dwellers have never heard birdsong in their lives. They don't realize how beautiful and strong it is. They think it's just little squeaks. Not at all. It is loud melodies.
Apart from those works devoted almost entirely to birdsong, birdsong crops up in practically every work by Messiaen after a certain date. And he uses them in a variety of ways, often as simple material, a tune by itself, if you like, but often as a decoration of slower material in the orchestra which floats by, and the birds decorate it, fly past it, as it were.
Birdsong is just one element in Messiaen's grand composition, the Taranga Lila Symphony. This vast work represents the high point of his romantic period, and is his strongest expression of joy in the physical world.
The Garden of Love's Sleep is the 6th movement of the symphony, and it is a hymn of love. The lovers are sleeping in the garden, and as they sleep, the birds are singing. The musical theme which represents their love is played by the ondes martineau and muted strings, and the vibraphone and piano play the birdsong.
The Second World War interrupted Messiaen's life as a musician, but it also led to the composition of one of his most appealing and deeply felt works. In 1940, while serving as a hospital orderly in the French army, he was captured by the Germans.
Vous savez que j'ai été captif et pendant un an, je n'ai pas mangé du tout. J'avais seulement le matin une...
I was a prisoner of war, and for a year I had nothing at all to eat. All I had was coffee, some black liquid in the morning, at midday soup, hot water with some sort of yellow powder in it, I don't know what, and in the evening coffee again. But never any solid food, just drinks, enough not to die. Of course, everyone was very unhappy, very thin, very ill, but I didn't notice the hunger, because I had colored dreams. And one day, in the block where the priests were imprisoned, I held a discussion about the colors of the apocalypse, and I was suddenly struck by the idea of the angel of the apocalypse who declares the end of time. That is the age when there will be no more time and no more space. Then we shall be agile and glorified. And it was after that I, a prisoner, wrote my quartet for the end of time, for my musician friends who were with me.
Pour la fin du temps, en captivité, pour les camarades musiciens qui étaient avec moi, donc un violoniste.
There was a violinist, Jean Laboulaire, a clarinettist, Henri Acoca, a very famous cellist, Etienne Pasquier, one of the Pasquier trio, and me as pianist. So I wrote a quartet for violin, clarinet, cello, and piano.
Violon, clarinette, violoncelle et piano. Je n'avais pas de piano, je n'avais rien.
I had no piano, I had nothing. We had instruments only on the day of the concert. But there was a German officer, a very nice man, who discreetly and without saying anything to anybody brought me music paper, pencils and erasers. I had prison work to do between 5 and 10 in the morning, but after that I used to hide myself in the priest's block, and there, with my music paper and pencils, I wrote.
La première exécution, c'était au Stalag.
The premiere was in the prison camp. There were 10,000 people from every class of society, peasants, bourgeoisie, bankers, priests, all sorts of people, all unhappy, all dying of hunger and cold. It was dreadful. And we ourselves, the 4 musicians, we were ridiculous, because we had only torn jackets, wooden clogs and fur hats against the cold and snow. One of the keys of Henri Acoca's clarinet had jammed, Etienne Pasquier's cello had only 3 strings, and my piano had keys which could be pressed down, but wouldn't rise again. When I played a trill, I had to take hold of the 2 keys and lift them back into position because they wouldn't spring back. So it was an awful performance. But the people there didn't know much about music, and as we were all companions in misfortune and all unhappy, the public was enthusiastic. It was a momentary escape, a moment of release for all those unhappy men who had nothing to eat.
Pour tous ces malheureux qui ne mangeaient pas.
I did not know what would happen to me. I had to work under forced labor, and I was ill-treated by the German soldiers, but that didn't matter to me. Even if I died, I knew that there would be paradise.
Ma musique n'est pas gentille, elle est sûre. Je suis persuadé.
My music is not nice, it is certain. I am convinced that joy exists. I am convinced that the invisible exists more than the visible. Joy is beyond sorrow. The invisible is beyond the visible, and beauty is beyond horror.
Cette pièce présente le grand cri de la misère humaine.
This work depicts the great cry of human misery, and that wonderfully gentle thing, God's reply and consolation. The piece describes a real abyss, the winding torrent of the Romanche River, in a passage through the Upper Alps called the Gorge of the Inferno.
In 1942, Messiaen was repatriated and became a lecturer at the Paris Conservatoire.
La chose initiale est toute simple.
The first step was simple, you see. It was purely to earn my living. It turned out that I had a gift for teaching, and I enjoyed taking classes. It became second nature. The role of teacher became part of my life. And I have been a lecturer in composition at the Paris Conservatoire for 40 years.
Messiaen was a committed teacher, and his influence on modern music has been considerable. Among his students in the 40s were the composers Pierre Boulez and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen.
Some of my pupils have become very famous, but that was not my doing. When a student is brilliantly gifted, he is gifted whatever happens. The teacher is not there to make students brilliant. He is there to teach the craft and to help the student find his way. That is the most difficult thing. Generally, what you have in front of you is a young person who is full of hope, who brings you something he has put his whole heart into. It is usually something which has miscarried overall, but which has a very good passage in it. But the student doesn't know that the good passage is good. He has to have it pointed out to him, and to be encouraged to continue in that vein. And to do that, the teacher must strip himself completely of his own ideas and his personal music, of everything he thinks and believes, so that he can concentrate completely on what is important for the student.
One of Messiaen's students in the early 40s was to play a vital part in his life and work.
One of the great events of my life was meeting Yvonne Loriot, my wife. who is really the only musician who truly understands me, who truly plays me as I want to be played and as I want to be understood. Avoided using a regular beat, because an even rhythm is artificial. Equal durations belong to a military march, which is an artificial thing. If you look at the branches of a tree, they are arranged unevenly. If you look at the waves of the sea, they are uneven. The regular beat is an artificial thing, unnatural and inhuman. Musicians and dictionaries of music down the centuries have analyzed music in different ways. They have talked about tonality, modality, serialism, random music, electroacoustic music, and so on and so on. Well, I'm not sure if any of that is true. There is only one thing which is true, and that is natural resonance.
Perhaps a good analogy to the phenomenon of natural resonance in sound is that of putting white light through a prism. You get all the colours of the rainbow through, and they are already in that white light. So when you play a sound on an instrument, piano for instance, you in fact get a series of what we call harmonics. When I play this low note, C, on the piano, a whole plethora of other notes are being produced at the same time. I won't explain the physics of it, but the notes you get are the following. They're much softer, but they're in that sound. As they get higher up, they get closer and closer together. And perhaps you might notice that the first four of them, 5, give the major chord that is at the root of all Western music. Now, it's done by, well, if you imagine a string vibrates its whole length and gives you a certain sound. But while that happens, it also vibrates half of its length, and that gives the octave. And then another part of its length that gives the fifth, and on, until you get tiny little bits of it vibrating, which are the ones up here.
There. I played all the harmonics. That is a true phenomenon, natural, scientifically recognized, and all music is of necessity based on it. My own music is based on that principle, more strongly than on all the schools and all the theories.
The phenomenon of natural resonance is crucial to all music, and indeed our own Western music. We find for centuries the composers have used the major chord, the first 5 harmonics, as the basis of their harmonic vocabulary, of the sounds they make. And we find at the beginning of this century that composers like Debussy, Ravel, Scriabin, and others add higher harmonics to that sound to give it a richness. And what Messiaen has done is he's added even further harmonics from high up to give his sound a stained glass quality, a brilliance, a luminosity. One of his favourite chords is made from the first 12 harmonics of natural resonance crushed into a chord. And the chord that results is this. He's also twisted natural resonance a bit, distorted it a bit to give certain other facets, certain other colours. All this slightly harsh sound, which comes from distorting the bass a bit. Look how the bass is crushed a bit. For me, this exploration of sound itself is crucial to Messiaen, and he has really stretched the way we hear sound and the way we hear music by adding to the actual material that we use to make sound. It gives it a richness beyond any music that was written before.
Music is much better than the other arts at expressing what is inside us, the surreal, the hallucinatory, the world of dreams. Music can express it, but painting and literature cannot.
From his earliest childhood to the present day, love has been the key to Messiaen's work, the love of nature, and above all, the love of God. Today, Messiaen continues to play the organ at Sainte Trinité, and he continues to compose. His most recent composition is an opera about St. Francis of Assisi. It's not clear what he'll write next, but what is certain is that he'll carry on expressing his faith in God and developing his own musical language.
There's a lot of talk of people without God, of agnostics and atheists. But I don't believe they are completely without God. There are even saints among the unbelievers. It's perfectly possible. Good acts are always good acts. But I do not believe there are people who are absolutely closed to the world beyond. I think that the most important thing is the fact that I have faith, and that I have communicated this faith through my music. That is what really matters.
One may find that the earlier works of Messiaen are easier to listen to. I prefer, actually, in many ways, the later works. They have more variety in them. I don't find them, some people may find them dissonant or difficult. I find them exuberant and rich in variety of colour. One simply has to get one's ears past prejudices that are being given to one at school or I don't know where, and simply accept the sounds for themselves. And once one's entered into the way that they move and what they do, they can be as thrilling as any music.
Modern music is not difficult. It is just the music of the times. It's worth remembering that in the classical period, Mozart's music was difficult for his contemporaries. They were bad musicians who wrote bad minuets. He alone had genius, and apparently it seemed very modern to everyone else. A king said to Mozart when he first heard the Seraglio, "This music is too complicated. There are too many notes in it." Mozart was furious and replied, "It has exactly the number it needs."
Il y a juste exactement ce qu'il faut, monseigneur.